jobs onto like quieter people or the yeah, and so like how they would give sim the jobs because like they lacking on in how when they go look for the beast in this book, like they just automatically assign people to watch like the little kids. Like they don't even like give them a choice. Like
yes.
I think they're not even talking to them, they're just talking over it. Like,
So where is that section?
21.
Okay. Okay, cool. So there, keep going. Sorry.
should I read the passage?
Yeah, let's do.
It says like, what about the little ones? Someone's got to look after them. Nobody has so far. There was no meat. Now there is maybe a look after them.
Yeah. And Piggy has legitimate concerns, right? And I think that it's like very mature of Piggy to recognize his weaknesses, because a little bit further down, he's like, I mean, what about us? Suppose the beast comes when you're all away. I can't see proper. And if I get scared, and Jack broke in contemptuously, you're always scared. And he says, I got the conch. And Jack goes, conch, we don't need the conch anymore. We know who ought to say things, right? So it's kind of like, they pawn the job off on Piggy. They notice that Piggy can't do much else. And so they're like, well, this is appropriate for you. You can just hang out with the little ones, right? And watch over them. And Piggy's like, well, if we're legitimately concerned about these little ones, I am not the right person for the job, right? I really find that very mature, that he can recognize that he gets scared easily and all that stuff. And Jack just completely shuts him down. And that phrase, we know who ought to say things, is like one of those instances where power is then breaking down, right? Where they're not going to obey the rules of the conch anymore, which is really aligned with Ralph. And they're instead going to potentially listen to Jack, who's just saying like, whoever's the most, the loudest and the strongest and the most forceful, etc., that's the person that gets to be in charge. But yeah, I think you're right. Like this kind of shunning off all of the hard work onto people, the way of like turning people into scapegoats, like they talked about at the end, or saying that they're not doing a good enough job, and so that's why we're going to justify giving them all the work, seems very convenient, so that then the people who are stronger in that group don't have to do any of that difficult work. Okay, what did you guys notice?
You're like to page 79. We were talking about how when we kind of decide to have dinner together, it's like that one assembly. I think it's the last assembly they've had for a while. It's the part where it says, we need an assembly, not for fun, not for laughing, falling off the log, not for making jokes or for cleverness, not for these things, but for things straight. And then they kind of like go through the stuff. Like we haven't been cleaning, we haven't been getting water. It's kind of similar to that, because it's like everything just breaks it down, and they're trying to be organized, but obviously it's more of just like time for stuff and higher.
Yeah, so they recognize some kind of a need for organization, because there is work that needs to be done for everyone to feel happy in that setting. Like they destroyed everything in Boys Alone, right? And then almost immediately, like it's within hours, they were like, oh wait, we don't want to live in a house like this. There's something human about wanting order too, and wanting a nice place to stay, right? And same with these guys, it's like, well, we don't want to have to go down to the river to drink the water. We want to have this coconut system in place that we set up at the beginning that makes us feel more civilized, more connected to the civilized world. And as they have these assemblies, and you look a little bit down too, it says we have lots of assemblies. Everybody enjoys speaking and being together. We decide things, but they don't get done. So it seems like the assemblies are all rhetoric, but the power is not being usefully implemented so that people will actually do what they are supposed to do, what they're assigned to do. And maybe part of that is because they just arbitrarily assign people things and they don't give them the chance to voice their opinions about which jobs they want to do. Okay, what were you guys noticing similarity wise?
We were just talking earlier about the ways that labels can kind of simultaneously limit us, but they also assign us a lot of authority.
Yeah, so there's really two passages that demonstrate this rather conclusively. First would be page 21, where they have the kind of first assembly and start talking with each other, and Ralph, kind of says, no, he's not Fatty, like all the kids were calling him Piggy. His real name's Piggy, and thereafter they're just like Piggy, oh Piggy, and everyone instantly labels him as Piggy. And also I do feel like there's kind of odd foreshadowing with that because of how
Yes.
they kill pigs. So that's rather unfortunate.
Yes, absolutely.
But then with respect to page 11, there's something that the book employs almost as a, I don't know, subtle hint that this is an underlying theme of the novel, and that would be, because before this passage, the book just referred to him as the fat boy, and then he whispers to Ralph, "They used to call me Piggy." Then Ralph shrieked with laughter. He jumped up, and then thereafter, just a few lines after, the book literally calls him Piggy and starts to label him in that manner.
Yeah,
And so it's like these labels are something that are arbitrarily ascribed. There's not a real rational or at least sympathetic basis to them,
yeah.
but they're nonetheless persistent and almost ingrained in sort of a group rhetoric.
Oh, that's fascinating that the book takes on then the labels of those things. And same with Ralph. Like as soon as Ralph is declared the leader, the book kind of takes on these expectations that Ralph then should behave in a certain kind of way. And the book decides that we're going to be inside Ralph's head, like as far as first person narration goes, or not first person, third person limited narration goes. We are more often inside Ralph's head, getting Ralph's feelings than a lot of the other characters. And maybe that is because it accepts the boys labeling him as the leader. Okay, so he's the protagonist. We've established that. Now we need to stick with him. Oh, that's really interesting. And the piggy quality is fascinating too, because you're right. There's this kind of like maybe too heavy-handed in some ways symbolism to calling him Piggy, right? And foreshadowing to what's going to maybe potentially happen to Piggy because of this label that he has taken on involuntarily. Kind of. He's the one who says, I was called this thing, right? He's the one who reveals that about himself. But tell me a little bit more about that connection. Why Piggy as a name? What does that have to do with the hunt? Yeah.
What kind of portrays him as someone who's like squeamish and just runs away, like pigs are actually one of the smartest animals, but like as far as like these boys are concerned, like they are like the victims and just like able to.
Good, and that kind of is Piggy too. Like seems to be the smartest in the group, but Simon seems very intelligent as well. But Piggy seems to be the one that is like knows the most things, I guess, the most practical knowledge in some ways. And yet he's the one that everybody looks at and thinks of as useless. And like you said, squeamish, like weak. Yeah, Dalen.
He's not seen as lazy,
Yeah.
but in a way, they never really give him the chance to do stuff.
Right.
Because they just expect him to know.
He wants to take charge. He wants to do his part at least. He likes that Ralph is in charge, but he keeps grabbing that conch and wanting to take on more responsibility and at least share his ideas, which are usually very good ideas. And yet like they completely are like, oh no, you are useless, Piggy. Yeah, any other connections we're seeing to a pig? Okay, and I think Sam is right about this idea of like naming from the beginning, because if you also look a little bit earlier on page 11, it says, I expect we'll want to know all their names, said the fat boy, and make a list. We ought to have a meeting. So there's this knowledge that they have from the very beginning that to know someone's name is to know them, and to know them is to know their role in the hierarchy. So Emily was talking about how the reason they get together is to establish that hierarchy, not to actually get things done. And one of the ways that they establish that hierarchy is with the names, and then the association that the names have to school or the nicknames that they're giving. Yeah.
I was just saying, subject of names earlier on page 21, I think. Jack is called Jack Merridew, not just Jack. And that's one of the few instances in the book where a full name is used.
Yeah.
And I think that it almost speaks to like perhaps Jack's, I guess, lack of leadership compared to Ralph is subject to his connection to civilization at that point, that he's still referred to with the first and last name, whereas Ralph really immediately feels disconnected from the grown-ups and from the form of life, and he's just Ralph.
Interesting. Yeah. So that Jack still hasn't been like fully integrated into this island setting.
And that's why he wants.
Well, yeah, on 21 too, though, it's him that insists on being Merridew, right?
Yeah.
Kid's name, said Merridew. Why should I be Jack? I'm Meridew. So it's, yeah, it's him trying to grasp on maybe to an old school version of authority. Maybe Jack then is not the purest kind of human on which people have thought of him. Like he's so savage, you know, he's so, and this book uses savage in a very problematic way, but he's so like kind of instinctual here, and he wants to fight, and he wants to see blood and all of this stuff. But maybe when he is referring to himself as Meridew and trying to be like an adult by referring to his last name as kind of heritage, it shows that he's actually the most connected to civilization, not to instinctual nature. That is really interesting. Yeah. Okay, and then this back group, what was your observation about Boys Alone and your passage?
So we saw that like it starts out chaos and like Boots like ruin everything, and then it goes to like a little bit of like calm and like there's like a leadership, and then it goes right back to chaos. And we showed that with 81 and 82.
Okay.
Like at the bottom of the top. I haven't finished yet, but you talked and talked. I've got the punch. Jack sat down grumbling. So it kind of shows like that transition between order and chaos, and it's like the boys start getting like anxious and they start getting like really annoyed at everything, and then like that's the line where it goes down.
Yeah, and Ralph recognizes that it's going down when he says things are breaking up, like a little bit further down on that.
Yeah.
Things are breaking up. I don't understand why. We began well. We were happy. And then he moved the conch gently, looking beyond them at nothing, remembering the beastie, the snake, the fire, the talk of fear. Then people started getting frightened. Do you think that Ralph is diagnosing the problem correctly there? Is it fear that is causing the group to break down and not follow authority? Or is it some, okay, so you're shaking your head no, why? What could it be if it's not fear? Yeah.
I think it's more of an instinctual thing. It's like because if it was fear, like I feel like the little kids are afraid. I'm not sure if like Jack is and stuff, but like I don't know, it could be fear because people start following Jack as a natural leader because he's got like the knife and because he can make spears and stuff.
Yeah.
So that could be why, but it does just seem to be more instinctual.
Okay. Jalen?
I feel like it's partly both because they crave guide and figure, and like depending on the circumstances of how you experience certain things, try to choose who would be best for certain situations.
Yeah.
So like you see some people switch off between who they follow.
So yeah, so it's kind of similar to Emberly's comment then, because Jack has the knife, and so the fear leads them to follow Jack, and Jack is more of a chaotic force. Right? Yeah.
I kind of think that fear almost does inspire more leadership. Just in that, like, you see that the little ones, what they're called, are more inclined to like gather for a meeting and stuff when they feel really frightened of these, and they're kind of comforted by the older kids. And they're more, I guess, kind of follow Ralph and Jack for that reason. I was gonna say, I think that the group becomes really disorganized and I guess less civilization when things are really good for them. When they're content.
Well, and that's kind of what he identifies, right? He's like, he says, things are breaking up. I don't understand why. We began well. We were happy. And so he kind of identifies that that's the moment when things were starting to break down and people weren't tending to the fire because they were like, why wouldn't we want to get rescued? This island's awesome. Like we get to run around naked and throw stones at people. Like we don't get to do that at school, you know? So he might be identifying that it is fear, and yet at the same time, kind of subconsciously, he's saying, but we were happy when things started to break down. Yeah, Brooklyn.
I think also it's interesting how Jack and Ralph use fear differently to like
Yes.
control the boys, because Jack portrays it as something like you're afraid, you're weak, like I'm not afraid, that's why you should follow me, like there's nothing to be afraid of. And Ralph like openly acknowledges like I think when like they're talking about hunting the beast and he's like I don't know, and Jack's like, are you frightened? And he's like, of course, like why, who wouldn't be? And like he acknowledges and kind kind of tries to bring the.
Yeah, I love that line. Yeah.
Through this, like, this united sense of like, this is something we all have to deal with, instead of Jack saying, like, this is something that we all, like, that we can't deal with, we have.
Yeah, and yet they are both kind of leaning on fear as an emotion to prop up their own authority in that way. Because Ralph, by choosing to say, even though I am afraid, I'm the leader, I'm going to be the one who goes and checks it out, he kind of solidifies his authority in that moment, right? By saying, like, if you trust me as a leader, then I need to go and do this thing. And taking on that responsibility and living up to it is going to kind of inspire the rest of these kids to be like, yeah, Jack is this figure of authority, right? Whereas, Ralph is this figure of authority. Whereas you're saying Jack is using it in kind of a different way. Jack, we watch him sort of try to use the fear in multiple ways. At first, he's like, there is no beast, there's nothing to be afraid of. And then as he goes along, I think he starts to see the usefulness of the beast. And he starts saying, like, there is a beast, I can protect us. And it kind of moves in that direction for him. Kylie?
So one of the things when we're always working with kids is that if one kid starts acting out, the rest of them follow.
Mm-hmm.
And so, some kids, like, they can't live in calm, you know, kind of like what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, if they realize that, like, things are calm, it's like a little eerie, and like a sense of like, something's wrong, like things should be quiet. And so if one of these kids has that sense, then, and like they start acting out whenever it's like nice,
Mm-hmm.
then the rest of them are gonna follow that. And so, yeah.
So it's such a group think idea then, right? That like the kids, like one little crack in the whole system and they're all gonna go a little insane. Yeah. They have a real reason to fear on this island. Go to page 86. So this comes early, and I don't remember exactly where it is. If you guys know where it is, let me know. But one of the children is missing, right, at the beginning, and one of the children has died. Do you know where that is? Because I was looking for it yesterday and I could not find it. They just noticed he's missing. Yeah,
And then look down
yeah.
at the fire.
Yes,
The fire, and then the way the bird has an asthma.
that's right. That's right. Okay, so this is them responding to that. Like, it's very delayed, that response. And it says, the little ones pushed Percival forward and left him by himself. He stood knee deep in the central grass, looking at his hidden feet, trying to pretend he was in a tent. Ralph remembered another small boy who had stood like this, and he flinched away from the memory. He had pushed the thought down and out of sight, where only some positive reminder like this could bring it to the surface. There had been no further numberings of the little ones, partly because there was no means of ensuring that all of them were accounted for. What is backwards about that? There had been no further numberings of the little ones, partly because there was no means of ensuring that all of them were accounted for.
The only means of ensuring that they're all accounted for is if you number them.
Yeah, exactly. So why aren't they numbering them? What are they trying to avoid here?
Any sense of responsibility or regret.
Yeah, exactly. So like if they number them and one of them goes missing, they're going to be terrified. They're going to have a sense of responsibility. These are the people that they have said by giving them a number, like, I am in charge, that we stay this same number, and they can avoid that. Exactly. Partly because Ralph knew the answer to at least one question Piggy had asked on the mountaintop. There were little boys, fair, dark, freckled, and all dirty, but their faces were all dreadfully free of major blemishes. What makes that dreadful? Like, it's nice to not have acne, so what makes it dreadfully free? Yeah. Ellen.
The boy that's missing has that big birthmark, which they're also their resume a lot. Like he's not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's that thing, right? Like they're all dreadfully free of major blemishes. The kid has that birthmark. That's right. I was forgetting about that for a second. He's going to talk about that here. The kid has that birthmark, and so they can identify that he is actually missing. Something kind of sets him apart, and so it's easy to tell that he's missing. There's also, though, a sense that they are all very young too, though. That they're young enough to not have to have experienced life. And so that makes it more dreadful as well, his death. And it says, no one had seen the mulberry colored birthmark again. But that time Peggy had coaxed and bullied, tacitly admitting that he remembered the unmentionable. Ralph nodded to Peggy. What is that idea? Remembered the unmentionable. What is he talking about there?
He's trying to, especially when he says coach bully, but
Mhm.
he's trying to force them to like take accountability. This kid who went missing, he's just unmentionable, like the boys, except for people, kind of like unspokenly agreed, like, yeah, it's just happened, like, no, it's just, our hands are for this.
Yeah.
But Piggy's like trying to come in and be like, no, like, I remember he was here, and now he's not.
Right. So let's go back to Sam and Ella's point about how the leadership is about like naming, right? That the way to organize a group is a lot about naming. That suggests that leadership is mostly about language and rhetoric. And if you can present yourself with the right rhetoric, then you can be the one in charge. Like either I present myself very confidently, or I say the right things to appeal to the most people. Like that's a way that I can kind of solidify my leadership, right? Jack is trying to take another track. Jack is trying to say, if I am strong enough, then I will be the natural leader. But Ralph is saying, if I have the punch, then I am the leader. If I have the ability to speak and be listened to. Right? But if there are things that are unmentionable on the island, that means there are ways that that leadership can be undercut. If the leadership is not going to acknowledge things that are actually scary, things that are actually threatening to the boys, like actual death, then his leadership becomes weaker and weaker. Yeah, Ember?
So the little boy goes missing on 46.
Oh, thank you.
And it's really interesting because I totally forgot about this, but he's the one who brought up the snake.
That's
so
right.
They start panicking, so like, where is he? And Piggy says, him with the mark in his face, I don't see him, where is he now? The crowd was as silent as death. Then that talks about the snakes, he was down there. And then there's like an explosion, and then they realize he's not.
Yeah, so there is Piggy. That's what it was. What it was referring to when it says he's bullying and coaxing them to recognize that this boy is actually gone. Yeah. Why do you think it's important that it's the one that mentions the snakes?
I just think it's kind of important because it's like the unmentionable thing, and so he died. And it's unmentionable because he was the first one to bring up the threat on the island, and then he died.
Yeah.
And so it's like all of that stuff is something that they want to forget about. But Piggy's like really holding fast this idea that it's a threat. They don't want to.
Yeah. So if there is an actual real threat, then how does the beast relate to this idea? What are they doing with the beast to try to why are they so obsessed with this beast? Sam and then
I think at the end of the day, it's sort of a projection of their own fears. You know,
Yeah.
they're taking everything that's realistic and that they were actually fear in a subconscious sense, and then encapsulating it in this beast
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
You know, that's, it's, nothing we've done, or it's, no lack of responsibility or sympathy on our part. It's something else, incomprehensible. We don't really know what it is. It's a beastie, et cetera.
Yes, and I like that they don't actually say it's snakes, or they don't actually say it is fire or anything like that. It is incomprehensible, this other thing that we can just label as other and push outside of our small group, and we can kind of concentrate on defending ourselves against this other thing and not have to recognize the unmentionable stuff inside us. Yeah, Brooklyn.
Yeah, along with that, I was just gonna say, like Sam was saying, it's directing the blame to something else. Instead of like acknowledging, like maybe if we had paid closer attention, like it, like something that is outside that they're fighting against instead of something that they need to fix.
Yeah. Right, which is harder work. It's harder work to examine the hierarchy and reaffix labels that have already been affixed and already been sort of accepted as truth. It's much harder to recognize that than it is to just kind of batten down the hatches and defend against an outside force.
More uniting to the group.
Yeah.
To be able to unite against something that's outside.
Yeah.
Than to it's harder to unite to try and fix something that's inside, because that involves like assigning blame to different people and like everybody kind of has the guilt in that.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's outside, everybody is just kind of like free of that and said like, this is exactly what we need to do. It's none of us that we need to.
Yeah, and that's not just something that we do in life or death situations when we're all stranded on islands, right? That seems to be such a truth of human nature. I mean, I just am thinking about my own job. Every job I've had has done that, but my job now definitely does that, where it's like the teachers against the outside forces, which are either you guys who aren't behaving and aren't learning the way that you should be because we're all awesome, or it's the administration who doesn't recognize how awesome we are, so we need to fight against them, right? And yet we don't really recognize within our group that there are probably some weaknesses, there are probably some things that we can learn. That's much harder to confront. It's much harder to say to my friend here, hey, you're a bad teacher, than it is to say, oh, that outsider, that's a bad principal, not that we have a beef with Mr. Horford, but it's that kind of idea. It's this in-group, out-group kind of idea, right? Okay, so that brings me to a second major question. So last time we were talking about a major question in this book is kind of what is socially learned and what is instinctually learned. Are we naturally violent animals from the get-go? Or has culture and society, by kind of shoving us together, taught us to act in a certain way for self-preservation? Like, it's that kind of an idea. The second major question that I think is coming up in this section of the book is about fear, and it's about, does fear, more like how does fear strengthen or weaken power and authority? And I think that is a big question in this book that is continually brought up, and another question that doesn't have a real solid answer, because it's both, and like we've been talking about, it's both simultaneously. Same as the instinct society question. It's almost like, should we even bother answering this question since everything is just so tied up together? Okay, so I just wanted to throw that out there, have a bit of a discussion on that before we get back to the Hannah Arendt stuff. So pull out your reading from last time that you were doing, where you were writing the different definitions. And you wrote the definitions according to you, and you wrote the definitions according to Arendt. Yes. All right, I'm gonna give you like 2 to 3 minutes to review this reading because we're gonna talk about it. And it's dense, so scan through, see any annotations that you made, review your definition. What do you think her definition of power is? Okay.
Like a group against.
Yeah, good. Group acting in concert. Okay, so that would mean then, that would mean that one person does not have any power, right? According to her. So how does that actually look? Like, explain that to me in real world terms, because in my mind, Joe Biden being the president is a powerful person. So how would she kind of describe the difference there, Kylie?
Like without the people, he wouldn't be the president. And so like the only reason he still is.
Okay, good. So I get that for democracy because we all voted for him, right? We all voted for him, right? I didn't mean to say it like that. But a majority of people have put this person into power, so that makes sense for a democracy. What is she talking about with like tyrannies and dictatorships, though? How does that work?
I think it's also the extent to which people will follow. Like, just the number of people who will allow you to do what. Like whether it's they're like actively following you or just kind of like, I don't know, just standing by and like letting the power happen.
Yeah, okay, so your agreement does not have to be overt. It doesn't have to be that every single person in this room votes for Joe Biden, and so therefore he is powerful. That's pretty obvious, right? But it also doesn't necessarily need to be that a majority of people approve of what somebody is doing. At different points in history, a majority of US citizens have very much disapproved of what a president was doing. I think at one point, George Bush's approval rating was 22%. So that means that like almost 80% of Americans are like, I hate what this guy is doing, and yet they still are going to follow or allow that person to stay in power, right? And so that's the idea. It's actually the people, the majority, the people who are not actively fighting against somebody that are actually powerful here. That is what power is. Yeah.
I think it also has to do, like, in like tyranny and dictatorship.
Yeah.
It's also like the amount of people who are random, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. Hold on. Yeah. Like the amount of people who are afraid of like the power that they have.
Yeah.
And like what they can do to like.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I think we tend to uphold power structures even if we see kind of threats around stable as a threat of, I guess, the weight of personal responsibility, like complete responsibility and the threat of this organization. Society is really weak.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely different in the book too. That like that kind of that this not for this one, I guess, but ever present threat of responsibility, which is kind of in their eyes like the last tide of that civilization, that like accountability is really frightening to them, and that's why they uphold power structures and that's like keep people in power that they maybe don't even necessarily.
Yeah, okay, good. So it's like it could be fear of the actual like leader and retribution from the part of that leader, right? But it also could be just fear of what can happen when you don't have a leadership position and when there's a vacuum in leadership and then there's chaos, you know. And so it's sort of this desire to uphold the status quo then. Yeah, Angela?
Yeah, and like a truly powerful organization, like you can take out the leader and like another one just comes right back in.
Yes.
Like that's the issue with revolutions. They're like, oh, they just go off the leader and then it's done. And they're like, no, we have to take out the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. When the queen dies, then the next queen or king is just going to, king in this case, right? Next king is just going to sort of like be the figurehead of that organization of the monarchy, but it is actually the monarchy that has the power. Yeah, and that gets us down to authority. So let's skip ahead to authority. What does she say the definition of authority is? Or numbers, I guess they kind of have numbers. Lost. Okay, what is her definition of authority, Brooklyn?
Relating to the most elusive of these phenomena and explore as a term most easily be best with such a thing as personal authority. Homer is unquestioning recognition by those who are asked.
Okay, yeah, and that's a really important part of it. I'm questioning recognition by those who must obey. So I think as we've had this conversation, we've kind of started to conflate power and authority. Power is something that everyone sort of like, everyone agrees that person has power, whether overtly or kind of like quietly, right? But the authority is the unquestioning recognition by those who must obey, and it is an office. So it's like this idea of the monarchy or the presidency having a kind of like unquestioned place at the head of a society. Yes.
And I think it's kind of interesting because we normally conceive of authority as, you know, someone or an office or something that has power to exert influence over others. And yet what she's saying here is that if you are actually exerting that influence over others, you're trying to coerce people to do something, that is a kind of sign or a hallmark of your loss of authority.
Yes.
That authority needs to be something that's passive and everyone just accepts.
Yes. Inherent, passive. Yeah. If somebody is trying to say like, no, I am authorized to make this decision, that's kind of like inherently means that they are not actually authorized to make that decision. If they have to actually say it out loud and sort of object to people questioning that, right? Because it has to be sort of this unquestioning idea that of course this person is in charge, of course this person can do these things that they are doing. Yeah. And then at the end of that, it says something so interesting. It talks about rebellion for a minute here, and there's other places in this book where it talks about rebellion, but it says the greatest enemy of authority, therefore, is contempt. The surest way to undermine it is laughter. What is that? Why would laughter and contempt be the best way to attack an authority? Kylie.
Like making up- And so
Yeah, they need people to take them seriously. If people don't have faith in them, then they're not in authority anymore. Sam?
I think that in this case of laughter, it would be because you're trivializing that entire office. You know,
Yeah.
it's something that doesn't really have any backing. It's just a joke.
Yes, you are recognizing the arbitrary nature of authority and therefore recognizing kind of the arbitrary nature of power as well. The fact that it could be vested in anything. It could have been like people with glasses now have the authority and we all just believe in it. It doesn't mean that people with glasses are inherently better than anybody else, you know? And so you laugh at that person and it kind of cuts down the idea that has any kind of rational thought behind it, that authority has any kind of rational backing to it at all. So I think like one of the funniest things to happen in the past couple of years was the who was it that did it? The K-pop fans. How they bought all the tickets to the Trump rally. Do you remember this incident? It was so funny to me because there's this idea. You guys reserved seats.
Yeah.
There's this idea that the rally, you know, as this group of thousands of people who are upholding certain power and placing certain faith in certain kinds of authority, right? That can be undone so easily by just a group of teenagers who, I don't know what the connection is, they're K-pop fans and they can just put out there, everybody reserve a ticket to this rally, and then nobody who is actually like supporting the power structure can show up. So I think like that's kind of what it's hinting at here is that if there is a violent overthrow of authority, that actually supports the idea that authority has power, right? It's so hard to use these terms. But if there is a violent kind of like rebellion, it's sort of saying like this person in authority, they do have authority over us. And so we need to exercise this violence to take them down. But by laughing at them, you're just saying you don't have authority over me. And it crumbles from that. Okay, tell me about strength and force. What are the differences between the two? Do you need one of these? Do you need one of these?
Probably.
Is that what you were?
No, I can.
Oh, great. Okay, what's the difference between, I didn't know you'd show up ready to go. What is the difference between strength and force? Oh, good.
Anyways, I think that the difference between strength and force is that strength is an ability that
Mm-hmm.
strength is like you can be because the first book named Jack or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
the one who's like the hunter.
Yeah, Jack.
He really struggles with killing and every time he has like the animal life, he can't do it. And then he forces himself to do it. I think that if he has strength, like the mental strength to do it, he can be able to do it. Like how
Yeah.
he like force himself to do it.
Yeah, okay, good. So strength is something that the individual owns. The individual has a kind of like ability to act. And then force is the energy that is released through that action. That's how she clarifies that. Taylor?
I didn't word that word.
Let's see. It says force, which we often use in daily speech as a synonym for violence, especially if violence serves as a means of coercion, should be reserved in terminal language terminological language for the forces of nature or the force of circumstances. That is to indicate the energy released by physical or social movements. So you were saying that the force is something that is, okay, yeah. I think force is more like what comes from somebody acting with strength. Ella?
I was gonna say on the topic of strength, it's really interesting that she described it as a parent,
Yeah,
especially when you consider somebody like Jack. Because he's sort of thrust into a leadership position with really a lot of like inherent strength, but he's still not like the ultimate leader. So it kind of just shows you that like strength really isn't the defining quality of somebody who has power.
Right.
Authority, I guess.
right. Just because you have strength does not mean that everybody will agree that you should be the one that is the leader.
Yeah.
And since everyone owns the power, it doesn't really matter that you want the strength.
You could argue that Piggy actually possesses maybe the most strength out of the group, just in terms of raw ability.
Yeah,
how,
and in bravery, like he's so
Yeah.
willing to stand up against the
very
group constantly.
accountable and very, I would really argue that Piggy possesses the most strength, but I guess again, like it says explicitly that the strongest individual can always be overpowered by the next.
Yeah.
So just because of that label that was put on initially of weakness, and that also goes back to strength, is that the weak sort of and be strong.
Yeah.
Just because the label is placed on his strength is ignored.
In fact, look to the very bottom of that paragraph. It says, it is the nature of a group and its power to turn against independence, the property of individual strength. So it actually tells us that when somebody expresses too much individual strength, when we see that they are willing to stand up against the group, or they have really good ideas and those ideas are going to overpower the rest of us, the group will actually turn against that too strong of person. We're way more interested in the leader who is going to follow the will of the power of the powerful, the many. Yeah. Okay.
I feel like strength is kind of like everyone has strength. Like everyone has the ability to like get strong. Everyone has the ability to like talk good. It's just like might take practice.
Yeah.
But force is like the ability to like use it on other people.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, force is like the energy released by physical or social movement. So it does mean that it has to be like actually happening. Yeah, Kimberly?
This reminds me of like the physics definition of it. It's like mass times acceleration. So it's like the person's raw strength
Yeah.
and like I don't know, just kind of like magnitude, and then it's like power associated with that. Like how many other people will like go with them and how big will this like.
I think that's exactly what she's thinking of there. Yeah, thank you. So mass times acceleration, I think, is like our official definition then of her force. Yes.
Two things. One, I think also this really reminds me because I did the and this reminds me while like we are now because all like we are never given the truth.
Well, that's a really interesting one because he might have been a very strong person in physicality. He seems to be like kind of, she calls him lumpish in that Hoyle essay, right? Or like a lump of bread or loaf of bread or something like that, right? Like, so he obviously has a lot of mass, but he doesn't have any of that acceleration. And so I think you're right that it has to be something that is kind of like motivated, and whether that means that it is motivated by people backing them up and kind of moving, making strength move, or is it motivated just by being like a very strong person who's able to motivate it themselves. Whatever it is, the force is the actual action. Yeah.
I think that's what Biggie inherently lacks, because he has this
Yes.
and like intelligence and stuff, but he doesn't really have a purpose. Like we even see him just kind of like aimlessly wandering around, and that's what he's lacking. That's why he's not really.
Yes, I think so. And you know who else kind of reminds me of this is Simon. We haven't talked about Simon at all. My favorite. I love Simon, the poet, right? He might have a lot of strength. He has creative strength. He has intellectual strength, it seems like. He has no force at all because he's terrified of other people, it seems. Brooklyn, and then to Ella.
like how it also mentions that like strength may prove itself in relation to essentially independent. So like you were saying with like Simon and Piggy, they can have this strength without I think that speaks to their strength that they and I mean Piggy tries more to like assert this
Yeah.
through force a
Yeah.
little bit, but
He just fails at it.
yeah, I think it speaks more to their strength that they're able to be content, like, with their abilities and not, like, they don't need others' approval to, like, uphold that strength. Like Jack, how he's always seeking, like, look, I killed the pig, like, look at me. And Simon just kind of recognizes, like, I do my, like, my responsibilities, I help other people, like,
Yeah.
this is just who I am. I have this strength that is just it's just me. It's
Yeah.
not a power because it's not like dependent on other people. It's just a strength.
So you're kind of saying that strength that needs to turn into power shows a kind of insecurity in one's own strength. That's super interesting. And keep in mind as we continue to read this idea that the group wants to turn against the individual, that the individual is always going to threaten the group. You can't have a group made up of individuals. Okay, tell me about her version of violence, because actually this is the one that I'm most interested in today. What is violence according to Arendt? And what is its more, because she would say violence is a destruction. Violence is destruction of the body. If it's violence against people, right? It's a way of undoing a lot of these things. How she calls violence a tool. But what is violence relationship to these other things? Sam?
She says, it's right there, it's something that is used to multiply natural strength. It's almost like a substitute for it. She says kind of the last sentence there, if you don't have the means through strength to kind of, I guess, exercise your authority or actually take hold of the power structure or fight against that, through your own independence and individual strength, then it's something that you need to do to actually gain that, I guess, independence or ability to fight against power.
Yeah, exactly. So she calls it a last resort. It would be good if you had strength. It would be better if you had power. If you don't have those things and yet you still need to lead, that's when you rely back on, that's why you go to violence, right? So she says that violence can threaten power. It always can. Get enough people to be violent in a situation and you're going to lose that consensus that power has. But violence can never be used to, and violence can be used to uphold your power because you're going to eliminate certain people, right? But violence is always a sign of your power weakening. Violence can never be used to gain power. Yes.
I think violence is also a symbol of lack of strength.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why violence is something that hurts power, is that once we see somebody who's violent and they're trying to use it as a tool for multiplying their inherent strength, that's kind of when the group kind of, I think, turns and looks at it and goes, oh, maybe we shouldn't have them together.
Yeah.
Because initially, I think before violence, it was, man, we really don't care about who has the most strength. Like, that's really not even a factor in leadership. It's really, that's only a factor when somebody utilizes, I guess, or they make power or they make strength there. Right.
Yes, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Brooklyn?
Along with that, I think it's really significant when like it uses violence and they're kind of like showing their own weakness, like that they are like struggling for power, but then it forces the person already in power, often like it forces them to resort to violence. So it's kind of, it's like, it's ironic because they're showing like their weakness and they're struggling to try and bring out like the weak side of the like the people in charge, so they can get people in charge to resort to violence. Then it like makes people see that like the people in charge don't have it completely under control either.
Yeah.
It's like this.
Yeah, and this works for rebellion, and I think it seems obvious for rebellion. Like you think of the French Revolution and people sort of like banding together to take on the monarchy, and the way that then there was violence, like that kind of escalated this way, right? As it shows both sides' weaknesses. This also works though in terms of individual crime too. If someone in a society acts out, it's a sign that that person does not respect the authority of the government in place or the society in place, and so is going to threaten that power by like, you're going to murder someone or whatever. And so the state then has to execute their own kind of violence, either removing that person from society and placing them in jail, or actually executing the person to make sure that they uphold that power structure. But the fact that the guy murdered in the first place is a sign of power's weakness, because if it was actually fully like pure power, no one would act out. Everyone would follow the rules. So in a classroom setting, I found that really interesting. Like I had authority from the first day, even if you didn't know me. So like the first day of AP Lang, for those of you, like I had authority because I had the name teacher. I also had authority, and I do it on purpose because I had the doctor thing. And so I'm like, okay, so I have these roles that they kind of inherently trust in. Like they come to school and they assume, I also had authority because I'm older. So like they come to school and they assume that because I have those three things that I have a certain level of knowledge, and so then I can kind of direct them where I want them to direct, right? But then I also gain power because everyone in the classroom, like right now, is like quiet. Like in other classrooms, especially not AP classrooms, like I don't have that kind of power all the time. And sometimes that power gets so difficult for me, like that power gets so undone as like different groups are talking and different groups are calling things out and different people are throwing things at the trash can or whatever, that I really completely lose power. And suddenly it becomes very clear that I'm not the one in power, it's the students that are in power in that situation, right? They always have been, but that becomes very clear through that. So they're kind of acting out, we could see as a kind of acts of violence that are uncutting or undermining my authority and my power, right? So then I, in turn, have to exercise my own kind of violence. I have to say, okay, everybody has to do an extra essay, or everybody has to sit silently and put their phones away, or I'm going to send you down to the principal's office or whatever. But every time I have to do that, it shows that I am actually not the one in power. And I think some teachers, you've maybe seen this in classrooms, where through the course of a year, that power is completely undone. And by the end, it's chaos in there. The teacher's back at their desk and they've given up. I'm done with this, Yesterday or last class, when I was telling this to we were talking about the power thing with B-Day, so AP Lit, but B-Day. Luke was like, I'm not gonna wash down my desk. Like, no, I'm not going to do it. Just as a sign of his own power, right? And then I had to step in and I had to wash the desk. And I think that is an exact example of this, where it's like, if he's not going to do his part in the structure to uphold my authority, then I start to become the weakling and they recognize me as just one of them. Yeah, Kylie.
Back in my youth grade Chinese class, the teacher didn't really know what she was doing. And the year started off normal. It started off like all the other Chinese classes. But then halfway through the year, there were kids just like dancing on the desk. We basically just watched anime the entire class. Even though it's not even Chinese.
That's my Japanese.
Yeah.
Really? Oh, okay.
She bought yo-yos for us.
Oh my gosh, you guys went outside and were playing with the yo-yos.
Yeah.
So it just became a way of avoiding that responsibility completely. Yeah, interesting. Allie Rose? Sorry. Should I come back to you? Okay, I'll come back to you. So the violent acts in the novel, the violent acts are ways that Ralph's authority is becoming undone, right? It's being threatened. So I want to look at a couple of those, and I'm going to make you guys do the work to find the passages. So in pairs again, same pairs, I want you to find one instance that you would call violence. And by violence, I just mean something that is upsetting the status quo, something that is undoing somebody's power or threatening somebody's power. So in your pairs, find one act of violence, and then we'll talk about it. Did you find it? You remembered?
No.
Oh.
I know,
Yeah.
I know it's going on.
So you're just finding one instance of violence or one instance where someone is refusing to follow the power, follow the authority of Ralph. So you guys were talking about when Piggy gets punched, right? Okay, let's look at that one. So where is it?
Page 71.
Okay, so everyone go to 71. Okay, tell me what you guys were thinking about how this fits in with the Arendt's definition or doesn't fit in with the Arendt's definition.
Well, in this case, Jack's power really isn't actually being threatened because it's kind of like his group had the power in this moment. They were able to go off and kill this pig instead of like taking care of the fire and like, I don't know. And so I guess it's more out of like humiliation that he lashes out. And like, I don't think that she really addresses like humiliation because like in reality, he's not actually doing.
Okay, so if it is humiliation, if the best way to undercut authority is to laugh at it, potentially that is a sign of humiliation, right? That if Jack feels humiliated by Piggy not giving up his glasses, that's the issue here, right? Forgot. No, his specs fall off. What he doesn't like is that they let the fire out, and Piggy is like chastising them for letting the fire out, right? And that's why he punches him. So in that way, that could be a kind of threat to his power, laughing at him in that moment. Could there be another reason here, though, for punching Piggy? Let's look here. It says, Jack stood up as he said this, the bloody knife in his hand. The two boys faced each other. There was the brilliant world of hunting, tactics, fierce exhilaration, skill, and there was the world of longing and baffled common sense. Jack transferred the knife to his left hand and smudged blood over his forehead as he pushed down the plastered hair. Piggy began again. You didn't ought to have let that fire out. You said you'd keep the smoke going. This from Piggy and the wails of agreement from some of the hunters drove Jack to violence. So I think that is like a threat here to his authority there, right? The bolting look came into his blue eyes. He took a step and able at last to hit someone, struck his fist into Piggy's stomach. Piggy sat down with a grunt. Jack stood over him. His voice was vicious with humiliation. So I do think you guys are right about that being the reason why Jack acts out, or the reason why this fits with Hannah Arendt's definition, right? But there's that section that says able at last to hit someone. And I think that taps into more than what Arendt is talking about here. Allie Rose?
I think the fact that he was confronted in the first place was what he didn't like his authority much. And he tried so hard to be an authority. He thought something like
Yeah.
And the way his actions show that it's something that he didn't earn, but something that he should have. And so his authority being questioned by someone who saw it as like at the very, very low part of the pyramid, it's like drives him to act out.
So the fact that Piggy is low in the pyramid allows Jack to hit Piggy with great approval, right? But it also kind of speaks to how Jack is able to act out his aggression. Ella?
I was gonna say, like, Arendt's, I guess, definition of strength is sort of put into question here, especially just when it's able at last. So
Yes.
it's kind of, instead of strength being innate and sort of unquestionable and constant, it's like strength is earned, and maybe strength is motivated by power struggle. Like the acquisition of strength is motivated by personal.
Interesting. Yeah, here, let me show you one little thing, and then when we get back, we will talk a little bit more about this. We'll read some Freud. This is Jack. He's a blob. This is Jack's sort of like whole identity, his consciousness, all of that. It's what is conscious and what is subconscious in Jack. And what it sounds like here when he says, I'm finally able to do something, in that image of him spreading blood over his face, it kind of sounds like inside Jack is all of this turmoil, all of this violence that is kind of just like inside him, right? And instead of that is growing more and more as he interacts more with violence. As a couple pages before this, they were trying to get the pig, and they were talking about like sticking the pig and spilling its blood and all of this like crazy violence, right? And it's all sort of under the surface. And as it grows, it's kind of threatening to implode. It's kind of threatening to take down Jack with it as he's going kind of crazy, right? So instead of letting that happen, we're going to make an outlet for it. And now all of this aggression is going to go to poor Piggy. And it's all going to kind of flow that direction because you can hit. It's a kind of catharsis. And as long as everybody else looks at that and says, woohoo, I'm glad Piggy got hit, this can be a way to sort of let out that energy. So I think that in this book, it's not just talking about the political structure that Hannah Arendt is building here, but it is also talking about a psychological reality underneath the surface of things. Sam, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that I think one of the ways this use of violence, and that it's something that can be attained at last, can be kind of integrated with this definition, would be that it is still something that demonstrates an upset of power, and it is used as a tool to multiply strength and the like. But that in and of itself doesn't mean that the person who's actualizing the violence dislikes that fact. Maybe it is kind of cathartic that their power is being upset in a way, and they are able to finally have a justified response in violence, or purportedly justified.
Yeah,
and
I like that.
So it's something that from a more objective perspective would be probably undesirable if you want to attain power, but in the moment it's something that is almost pleasing.
Yes, Hannah Arendt is talking about how power is always the end goal, that everything we do is kind of like for that kind of power, to gain that kind of power, is motivated by that, right? And here you were talking about a different kind of motivation, then, that we might act against our best interest in these terms, because this feels so good. Yeah. Okay, let's clean the desks. You are reading up through chapter 9 for next time. So a kind of short section. Yeah.
Have you seen Jojo Rabbit?
I have, yeah.
So to me, Piggy looks like the fat friend.
Oh.
Like every time I hear Piggy, that's
That kid's so cute.
Yeah, little chubby kid with glasses.
Also, I love this.
Awesome.
Did you know that Hitler had to be split by a British man? Yeah.
Yeah, take away CD, like part Jewish, part Maori.
I love that man.
Hello.
Are you going to go up? I didn't do that. Yeah.